What if I told you that the biggest lie you have ever believed is not something another person told you? It's something you tell yourself every single day. I can't. I'm not ready. Maybe tomorrow. Those three sentences have quietly stolen more dreams than failure ever could. But today, that changes. Because in the next few minutes, you will discover how one man shattered those lies, rebuilt his identity from the ground up, and proved that the limits we accept are often nothing more than stories we repeat inside our own minds. This is not just the story of David Goggins. This could become the beginning of yours. Introduction. Before we begin, let me ask you one question. How many times have you promised yourself that you were going to change? Maybe you were going to wake up earlier, start exercising, build a business, learn a new skill, read more books, become more disciplined. For a few days, everything goes well. Then life happens. You become tired, busy, distracted, and slowly, without even realizing it, you return to the same habits. Weeks pass, months pass, sometimes even years, and one day you wake up wondering where all that time went. If that sounds familiar, you're not alone. Millions of people live inside this cycle, not because they are lazy, not because they are incapable, but because they have never learned how to control the one thing that determines every decision they make: their mind. That is exactly why David Goggins' story has inspired millions of people around the world. Not because he became a Navy SEAL, not because he ran ultramarathons, not because he completed impossible physical challenges. Those are only the results. The real story is much deeper. It is the story of a man who refused to let his past become his future. A man who understood that changing your life has very little to do with talent and almost everything to do with discipline. Throughout this journey, you're not simply going to learn about David Goggins. You're going to discover why most people quit, why motivation disappears, why fear controls our decisions, why discomfort is necessary for growth, and most importantly, how you can begin applying these lessons to your own life today. Because this video is not about admiring someone else's success. It is about discovering what is possible inside yourself. So leave every distraction behind. Listen carefully, because one idea can change the direction of an entire life. And sometimes, that idea arrives when you least expect it. Chapter 1. The day everything changed. Every transformation has a beginning. Not the beginning that the world sees. Not the moment people start applauding. Not the moment success finally arrives. The real beginning happens in silence. It happens when a person becomes completely honest with themselves. Long before David Goggins became known around the world, he was fighting a battle that nobody else could see, a battle inside his own mind. He was carrying the weight of painful experiences, the weight of self-doubt, the weight of believing that his life would never become anything different. Every morning looked almost identical to the day before. Wake up, follow the same routine, avoid difficult challenges, find temporary comfort. Promise yourself that tomorrow will be different. Tomorrow becomes next week. Next week becomes next month. And before you realize it, years disappear. This is how dreams slowly die, not through one dramatic failure, but through thousands of ordinary days where nothing changes. David eventually reached a moment that many people spend their entire lives avoiding. He looked honestly at himself, not the version he showed the world, the real version, the one that knew every excuse, every shortcut, every broken promise. And he asked himself one question that would change everything. What if the only person standing between me and the life I want is me? That question was painful, because honest answers usually are. It is much easier to blame bad luck, bad timing, other people, the economy, your past, your circumstances. But the moment you stop blaming everything outside your control, you discover something incredibly powerful. You still have control over yourself, and that changes everything. For the first time, David understood that no one was coming to rescue him. No one was going to build discipline for him. No one was going to create confidence for him. No one was going to fight the battles inside his mind. If his life was going to change, he would have to become someone different. That realization became the first turning point of his entire life. Most people think change begins with motivation. It doesn't. Motivation comes and goes. Real change begins with radical honesty. The willingness to stop lying to yourself, to admit where you are, to accept responsibility for where you are going. Because until you accept responsibility, you give your future to circumstances. David made a different choice. He chose responsibility. He chose discomfort. He chose growth. And although he had no idea how difficult the road ahead would become, he also knew one thing with complete certainty. Going back to the person he had been was no longer an option. The decision to change was only the beginning. Because making a decision is easy, living according to that decision is where the real battle begins. Many people have moments where they feel inspired. They watch a powerful video. They hear a powerful story. They feel a sudden desire to become better. For a moment, they believe everything is possible. But then reality arrives. The alarm rings in the morning. The work becomes difficult. The results are not immediate. The excitement disappears. And that is when most people return to their old habits. David Goggins discovered that a new life cannot be built with temporary emotions. It requires something stronger. Commitment. A commitment to continue even when the feeling disappears. He realized that the person he wanted to become could not be created by the same choices that created the person he was trying to leave behind. If he wanted a different future, he needed different actions, different standards, different habits. This is one of the hardest truths in personal growth. You cannot create a new life while protecting the old version of yourself. The old version wants comfort. The old version wants easy decisions. The old version wants to avoid anything that creates fear or uncertainty. But the future version of yourself requires something different. It requires courage. It requires discipline. It requires doing things that your current self does not always want to do. David began to understand that discomfort was not the enemy. For years, people are taught to avoid discomfort, avoid failure, avoid rejection, avoid difficult situations. But he discovered that discomfort is often the doorway to growth. The person who never challenges themselves never discovers what they are capable of. A person can spend their entire life believing they have limits, simply because they never tested them. David wanted to test himself. He wanted to discover what existed beyond his excuses, what existed beyond fear, what existed beyond the voice telling him to stop. That voice is something every person knows. It appears whenever you try to improve. It says, "Do it later. You are tired. You have already done enough. You are not ready." At first, that voice sounds reasonable. It sounds like protection. But David started realizing something important. That voice was not always protecting him. Sometimes it was protecting his comfort. And comfort can become dangerous when it prevents growth. He began training himself to question that voice. Instead of immediately obeying it, he challenged it. Instead of asking, "How do I avoid this difficulty?" he started asking, "What can this difficulty teach me?" That change in thinking became the foundation of his transformation. Because the same challenge can destroy one person and build another. The difference is the meaning they give to the challenge. A weak mindset sees difficulty and says, "This is impossible." A growth mindset sees difficulty and says, "This is an opportunity to become stronger." David chose the second path. He stopped seeing obstacles as reasons to quit. He started seeing them as tests. Tests of his commitment. Tests of his character. Tests of the person he wanted to become. Slowly, something began to change. Not only his actions, his identity. He was no longer someone waiting for life to improve. He became someone actively improving himself. And that difference is everything. Because people usually act according to the identity they believe they have. If someone believes they are weak, they search for evidence that proves it. If someone believes they are capable of growth, they search for opportunities to improve. David was building a new identity through action. Every difficult choice became proof. Every challenge completed became proof. Every time he continued, when quitting was easier, became proof. Proof that he could trust himself. And self-trust is where real confidence begins. Confidence is not created by telling yourself you are great. Confidence is created when you repeatedly prove to yourself that you can handle difficult situations. That was the beginning of David Goggins' transformation. Not a single achievement, not a single victory, but thousands of small moments where he chose growth over comfort. He was rebuilding himself from the inside out. But he still had a long journey ahead, because changing your mindset was only the first battle. The next challenge would be even harder, building the discipline required to maintain that change every single day. And that discipline would become the foundation of everything David Goggins achieved. David was beginning to understand a powerful truth. A person does not change their life by making one big decision. A person changes their life by making better decisions repeatedly. Every single day, the transformation happens in the moments nobody sees. When you choose discipline instead of comfort, when you choose action instead of excuses, when you choose progress instead of staying the same. Those moments may appear small, but small choices repeated over time create a completely different person. David started to realize that his biggest enemy was not the world around him. It was the version of himself that wanted to remain comfortable. That version of himself had years of experience. It knew exactly what excuses to use. It knew exactly when to appear. Whenever something became difficult, it would try to convince him to stop. But David began developing a new relationship with difficulty. He stopped asking, "How can I make this easier?" and started asking, "How can I become strong enough to handle this?" That question changed his entire approach to life. Because successful people are not people who experience fewer problems. They are people who develop the ability to handle bigger problems. They become stronger. They become more patient. They become more disciplined. They become more resilient. David understood that the goal was not to create a life without challenges. The goal was to become someone who could face challenges without breaking. This idea became one of the most important foundations of his mindset. You cannot control every situation. You cannot control every obstacle. You cannot control what happens around you. But you can control your response. And your response determines who you become. Every challenge became an opportunity to train his mind. Every uncomfortable moment became a chance to practice discipline. Every difficult decision became another step toward the person he wanted to become. The journey was not easy. There were still moments of doubt. There were still moments of fear. There were still moments where quitting seemed like the easier option. But something was different now. Before, David allowed those feelings to control his actions. Now, he learned to act despite them. That is a major difference. Being mentally strong does not mean you never feel fear. It means fear does not decide your future. Being disciplined does not mean you always feel motivated. It means you continue even when motivation disappears. Being confident does not mean you never doubt yourself. It means you trust yourself enough to move forward anyway. David was slowly becoming that person. The person who no longer needed perfect conditions to take action. The person who no longer waited for permission. The person who understood that his future was built by the choices he made today. And this was the true beginning of his transformation. Not the medals, not the achievements, not the recognition. The true victory was becoming someone he could respect, someone who kept promises to himself, someone who faced challenges instead of avoiding them, someone who refused to surrender to the easiest path. Because at the end of the day, the greatest battle is not against other people. It is against the weaker version of yourself, the version that wants to quit, the version that wants comfort, the version that says, "You have done enough." David Goggins decided that voice would no longer control him. He decided that his future was worth fighting for. And that single decision became the foundation of everything that came after. The first step was complete. He had taken responsibility. He had faced the truth. He had decided to change. But a decision alone does not create transformation. A decision needs action, and action requires discipline. That would become the next chapter of his journey. Chapter 2. Rebuilding yourself through discipline. After David Goggins made the decision to change his life, he discovered a truth that many people never understand. A decision can change your direction, but discipline determines your destination. Many people have moments where they decide they want more. They want a stronger body, a better career, a healthier life, a more successful future. They feel inspired. They create plans. They imagine the person they want to become. But inspiration is temporary, because sooner or later, Every person faces the same test. The moment when the excitement disappears. The moment when the work becomes difficult. The moment when nobody is watching. That is where discipline becomes the difference between people who change and people who remain the same. David Goggins learned that motivation cannot be the foundation of success because motivation depends on emotion, and emotions change every day. Some mornings you wake up feeling unstoppable. Other mornings you wake up feeling tired and full of doubt. If your actions depend only on how you feel, your progress will always be inconsistent. But discipline creates something stronger. Discipline creates a standard that says, I do what needs to be done, even when I don't feel like doing it. That mindset was the beginning of rebuilding himself. David understood that he could not create a powerful future while continuing the same behaviors that created his old life. A new life requires new habits. A new identity requires new actions. This is where many people make a mistake. They want different results, but they refuse to change their daily behavior. They want success, but protect their comfort. They want confidence, but avoid challenges. They want growth, but avoid anything uncomfortable. The truth is simple. Your daily choices are creating your future version. Every action is a vote for the person you are becoming. When you choose discipline, you vote for strength. When you choose excuses, you vote for staying the same. David started focusing on controlling the small decisions because he understood something important. Great achievements are built from ordinary actions repeated consistently. A person does not become mentally strong in one day. They become mentally strong through thousands of moments where they choose not to quit. The early morning when they want to sleep. The difficult task they want to avoid. The promise they made to themselves that nobody else knows about. Those moments build character. Those moments build trust. And trust in yourself creates real confidence. Many people search for confidence by waiting until they feel ready. But confidence does not come before action. Confidence comes from action. It comes from proving to yourself that you can do difficult things. Every time you keep a promise to yourself, you build evidence. Evidence that you are reliable. Evidence that you are capable. Evidence that you can trust yourself. David Goggins built confidence this way, not by simply telling himself he was strong, but by repeatedly showing himself that he could overcome challenges. He learned that discipline is not a punishment. It is a form of freedom. Freedom from excuses. Freedom from regret. Freedom from being controlled by temporary emotions. Because when you become disciplined, you stop asking, do I feel like doing this? You start asking, is this the action that moves me closer to the person I want to become? That question changes everything. Because the future version of you is depending on the decisions you make today. And every decision is shaping your identity. David was no longer trying to become a different person overnight. He was rebuilding himself one choice at a time, one habit at a time, one challenge at a time. But discipline was not just about working harder. It was about becoming someone who could be trusted, someone who kept commitments, someone who showed up, someone who continued even when things became difficult. That was the foundation David Goggins built, and that foundation would later allow him to face challenges most people would consider impossible. As David continued rebuilding himself, he discovered that discipline was not created through one powerful moment. It was created through repetition, through showing up again and again, through doing the work even when nobody was there to recognize it. This is where most people misunderstand discipline. They think disciplined people are always motivated. They imagine that successful people wake up every day feeling excited and ready. But the reality is different. Disciplined people experience the same emotions as everyone else. They feel tired. They feel doubt. They feel the temptation to choose the easier path. The difference is that they have learned not to let those feelings control their decisions. David understood that emotions are temporary, but the consequences of your choices can last much longer. A moment of comfort can create years of regret. A moment of discipline can create years of progress. That is why he focused on making decisions based on his goals, not his feelings. He started asking himself, will this choice make me stronger or weaker? Will this bring me closer to the person I want to become? Am I choosing comfort or am I choosing growth? These questions created awareness, and awareness is the beginning of change because you cannot change a behavior you refuse to recognize. David began paying attention to the patterns that controlled his life. The moments when he searched for excuses, the moments when he wanted to avoid difficulty, the moments when his mind tried to convince him that stopping was the logical choice. Instead of ignoring these moments, he used them as training. Every time he faced resistance, he practiced overcoming it. Every time he wanted to quit, he practiced continuing. Every time he felt weak, he practiced becoming stronger. This is how discipline is built, not by avoiding struggle, by learning how to handle struggle. The mind is like a muscle. The more you train it, the stronger it becomes. But just like physical training, mental strength requires resistance. Without challenges, there is no growth. Without pressure, there is no adaptation. David started understanding that the difficult moments were not preventing his progress. They were creating it. Another important lesson he learned was the importance of keeping promises to yourself. Many people make promises to others. They show up for their jobs. They keep commitments to friends. They respect deadlines. But when it comes to themselves, they often break their own promises. They say, I will start tomorrow. I will do it next week. I will change when the time is right. Over time, this damages something very important: self-trust. When you repeatedly break promises to yourself, your mind starts believing that your own words have no value. But when you keep those promises, something changes. You begin trusting yourself. You begin believing that you are capable, and that belief becomes powerful. David built his confidence by proving to himself that his words mattered. If he said he would do something, he worked to complete it, not because every day was easy, but because every promise kept was another step toward becoming the person he wanted to be. This is the difference between wishing and transforming. Wishing says, I hope my life changes. Transformation says, I am willing to change my actions. David chose transformation. He stopped waiting for the perfect conditions. He stopped waiting to feel ready. He understood that waiting for confidence creates a never-ending cycle, because confidence comes after you take action, not before. The first step creates the second step. The second step creates momentum. Momentum creates progress. Progress creates belief. And belief creates a stronger identity. That is how ordinary people create extraordinary changes. Not by doing one impossible thing, but by consistently doing the necessary things. David's discipline became the foundation that supported everything else in his life. Without discipline, talent disappears. Without discipline, goals remain dreams. Without discipline, potential is wasted. But with discipline, a person can completely change their direction. They can become someone they once believed was impossible. David Goggins was proof of that. The person he became was not created by luck. It was created by thousands of choices. Thousands of moments where he decided that his future mattered more than his comfort. And this mindset would prepare him for the next level of his journey, because discipline builds the foundation. But the next challenge would test whether that foundation was strong enough. The next challenge was learning how to use pain, failure, and suffering as tools for growth. Chapter 3: Turning Pain into Power. After David Goggins built the foundation of discipline, he discovered another truth that would completely change the way he viewed life. Pain is not always something that destroys you. Sometimes pain is the exact thing that builds you. Most people spend their lives trying to avoid discomfort. They avoid difficult conversations. They avoid situations where they might fail. They avoid challenges that could expose their weaknesses. They believe that avoiding pain will protect them. But David learned that avoiding every difficult experience creates a different type of pain. The pain of regret. The pain of knowing you had more potential but never discovered it. The pain of looking back and asking, what could I have become if I had tried? This realization changed the way David approached challenges. He stopped seeing difficulty as something that was attacking him. He started seeing difficulty as something that was training him, because the same experience can create two completely different results depending on your mindset. One person faces a challenge and says, "Why is this happening to me?" Another person faces the same challenge and asks, "What can this teach me?" That question separates growth from defeat. David understood that every difficult moment carried a lesson. Failure was not proof that he was incapable. Failure was information. It showed him where he needed to improve. It showed him what needed more work. It showed him what weaknesses needed to become strengths. This mindset allowed him to continue when many people would have stopped, because he was no longer trying to create a life without problems. He was trying to become the type of person who could handle problems. That is a completely different goal. Many people spend their energy trying to control everything around them. They want life to be easier. They want challenges to disappear. They want success without struggle. But life does not work that way. Challenges are part of the process. The question is not whether you will face difficulty. The question is who you will become while facing it. David began developing what he described as a stronger mind, a mind that could handle pressure, a mind that could continue when emotions were telling him to stop, a mind that understood discomfort was temporary, but growth could last forever. Think about how a person becomes physically stronger. A muscle does not grow because everything is comfortable. It grows because it faces resistance. The resistance creates adaptation. The same thing happens with the human mind. Challenges create mental strength. Failure creates experience. Difficult moments create resilience, but only if you choose to learn from them. Pain by itself does not make people stronger. The response to pain is what creates strength. Two people can experience the same failure. One person allows it to define them. The other person uses it as motivation. The difference is not the situation. The difference is the mindset. David refused to let his past become his identity. He understood that what happened to him was part of his story, but it was not the final chapter. This is a powerful lesson for anyone. Your mistakes are not your identity. Your failures are not your identity. Your struggles are not your identity. They are experiences, and experiences can be transformed into wisdom. The person you are today is not limited by the person you were yesterday. Every day gives you another opportunity to make a different choice, another opportunity to improve, another opportunity to build yourself. David's transformation was built on this principle. He stopped asking how to escape difficulty. He started asking how to use difficulty. That change created a completely different relationship with challenges. A difficult workout was no longer just pain. It was preparation. A failure was no longer just disappointment. It was a lesson. A setback was no longer the end. It was another opportunity to continue. This mindset became one of the strongest weapons in his journey. Because when you stop fearing challenges, they lose their power over you. And when challenges lose their power, you become free to grow. David began to understand that the hardest battles are not always visible. People can see physical challenges. They can see someone running. They can see someone training. They can see someone pushing their body. But they cannot always see the internal battle. The battle against doubt. The battle against fear. The battle against the voice that says, "You are not good enough. You cannot do this. You should stop." Every person has experienced that voice. It appears when you try something difficult. It appears when you step outside your comfort zone. It appears when you attempt to become someone better. Most people listen to that voice. They accept it as reality. But David learned something important. The mind is not always telling you the truth. Sometimes the mind is simply trying to protect you from discomfort. The human brain naturally searches for safety. It wants to conserve energy. It wants to avoid pain. That was useful for survival. But in modern life, that same instinct can prevent growth. It can convince you to stay in situations that are comfortable but limiting. It can make you choose temporary comfort over long-term success. David decided he was no longer going to allow that instinct to control him. He began training his mind to tolerate discomfort, not because he enjoyed suffering, but because he understood the value of becoming stronger. This is a lesson that applies far beyond physical challenges. Every person has their own version of discomfort. For one person, it may be starting a business. For another, it may be learning a new skill. For another, it may be improving their health. The challenge is different, but the principle remains the same. Growth requires resistance. You cannot become a stronger person by always choosing the easiest option. You cannot develop confidence by avoiding every situation that scares you. You cannot discover your potential without testing yourself. David realized that many people underestimate themselves because they have never reached the point where their excuses disappear. They have never discovered what they can do when they stop negotiating with themselves. That discovery became one of the most valuable parts of his journey. He learned that there is often a gap between what you think you can do and what you are actually capable of doing. The only way to discover that gap is through action, not through thinking, not through wishing, not through waiting. Through action, every challenge becomes a conversation with yourself. A conversation that asks, how committed am I? How much do I really want this? Am I willing to become uncomfortable for something important? These questions reveal character, because character is not built when everything is easy. Character is built when doing the right thing is difficult. David's life became an example of this principle. He transformed pain into fuel. He transformed failures into lessons. He transformed weaknesses into areas of improvement. But the most important transformation happened inside his mind. He stopped seeing himself as a victim of his circumstances. He started seeing himself as responsible for his future. That shift gave him power, because responsibility creates control. When you blame everything outside yourself, you give away your power. But when you accept responsibility, you gain the ability to act. You may not control everything that happens to you, but you control how you respond. And your response determines your direction. This is why David's story is so powerful. It is not only about extreme achievements. It is about personal ownership. It is about refusing to surrender your future to your fears. It is about understanding that your current situation does not have to become your final destination. The person you are today is simply the starting point. The question is, what are you going to build from here? Because every challenge you face is an opportunity to become stronger, an opportunity to become wiser, an opportunity to become someone your past self would not recognize. David Goggins did not become extraordinary because he avoided pain. He became extraordinary because he learned how to use pain. And that lesson would lead him to an even deeper battle, a battle that happens inside every person's mind, the battle to control your thoughts, the battle to master your own mind. Because before you can change your life, you must first learn how to control the person living inside your head. Chapter 4. Mastering Your Mind. After David Goggins learned how to use pain as a source of growth, he discovered the most important battlefield of all, the mind. Because every physical challenge begins as a mental decision. Before your body moves, your mind decides. Before you quit, your mind creates the reason. Before you succeed, your mind creates the belief that makes action possible. David realized that the strongest person is not always the person with the strongest body. It is often the person with the strongest control over their own thoughts. Most people are controlled by their minds without even noticing. A negative thought appears, and they believe it. A feeling of fear appears, and they obey it. A difficult moment arrives, and they immediately search for an escape. But David started understanding something powerful. A thought is not always a command. Just because your mind says something does not mean you have to follow it. Your mind can create fear. Your mind can create excuses. Your mind can convince you to stop before you have reached your true ability. The question is not whether negative thoughts will appear. They will. The question is, will you allow those thoughts to control your actions? That was the battle David decided to win. He began training his mind the same way someone trains their body. With repetition, with challenges, with discipline. Because mental strength is not something you're simply born with. It is something you develop. Every time you face difficulty instead of avoiding it, your mind becomes stronger. Every time you continue when quitting feels easier, you build resilience. Every time you challenge your own excuses, you become more powerful. David understood that the mind often tries to negotiate. It says, you can stop now. You have already done enough. Nobody will know if you quit. These thoughts sound convincing because they appear during moments of weakness. But David learned not to treat every thought as truth. He learned to question them. Is this really my limit? Or is this simply the moment where growth begins? Am I truly unable to continue? Or am I just uncomfortable? Those questions created a new level of awareness. Because awareness gives you a choice. Without awareness, you react. With awareness, you decide. This is one of the biggest differences between people who grow and people who remain stuck. Stuck people are controlled by their automatic reactions. Strong people learn to control their responses. David was not trying to remove all negative thoughts from his mind. That is impossible. Instead, he was learning how to become stronger than those thoughts. A strong mind does not mean you never feel fear. It means fear does not make your decisions. A strong mind does not mean you never feel tired. It means tiredness does not automatically become an excuse. A strong mind does not mean you never struggle. It means struggle does not define your future. David discovered that your mind can be your greatest enemy or your greatest weapon. The difference depends on how you train it. If you constantly feed your mind with excuses, it becomes weaker. If you constantly challenge it with discipline, it becomes stronger. Every day gives you opportunities to train your mind. When you wake up early, when you finish a difficult task, when you choose patience over frustration, when you continue learning even when progress is slow. These are not just actions. They are mental training. They are moments where you prove to yourself that you are in control. And over time, those moments change your identity. You stop seeing yourself as someone who gives up. You start seeing yourself as someone who continues. You stop seeing obstacles as walls. You start seeing them as opportunities to improve. That is how David Goggins built mental toughness. Not by becoming someone who never struggled, but by becoming someone who refused to surrender. And this mindset would become the foundation for everything that came next. Because mastering your mind is not about controlling every situation in life. It is about controlling yourself when life becomes difficult. And that ability is what separates ordinary results from extraordinary results. As David continued strengthening his mind, he began noticing something that had been controlling his life for years without him realizing it. His inner conversation. Every single day, people speak to themselves thousands of times. Most never notice it, but those quiet conversations slowly shape the way they see themselves. Imagine waking up every morning and telling yourself, I'm always behind. I'm not talented enough. I'll probably fail anyway. At first, they're only thoughts, but after hearing them day after day, they begin to feel like facts. David refused to let those thoughts become his identity. He understood that your mind believes what you repeatedly feed it. If you constantly repeat excuses, excuses become your reality. If you constantly repeat responsibility, responsibility becomes your identity. That did not mean pretending everything was perfect. It meant refusing to lie to himself in a different way. Instead of saying, I can't do this, he learned to ask, what do I need to improve so I can do this? That small change completely transformed the direction of his thinking. One statement ends the conversation. The other creates a solution. David also realized that the mind has a dangerous habit. It likes certainty, even if that certainty keeps you trapped. A familiar struggle often feels safer than an unfamiliar opportunity. That is why so many people remain in the same place year after year. Not because they lack ability, because change feels uncertain. David decided that uncertainty was no longer something to fear. It became something to explore. Every challenge became an opportunity to discover another part of himself. Every obstacle became proof that he was moving instead of standing still. Then he noticed another pattern. Whenever he achieved something difficult, his mind immediately wanted to relax. It whispered, you've earned a break. Slow down. You're already doing better than most people. There is nothing wrong with rest. Rest is necessary. But David understood the difference between recovery and complacency. Recovery prepares you to continue. Complacency convinces you that growth is no longer necessary. He refused to confuse the two. He celebrated progress, but he never allowed progress to become an excuse for stopping, because he knew that success is not a destination. It is a responsibility. Every level you reach demands a stronger version of yourself. If you stop growing, you slowly begin moving backward. That is why David continued raising his standards. Not because he wanted to impress the world, but because he never wanted to become comfortable with less than his potential. This lesson applies to every area of life. Whether you want better health, a stronger career, a successful business, better relationships, or greater confidence, your greatest competition is never another person. It is the version of yourself that settles too early. The version that says, "This is good enough," when deep inside, you know you still have more to give. David challenged that voice every day, not through anger, not through ego, but through consistent action. He understood that every disciplined choice strengthened his character. Every promise he kept strengthened his identity. Every difficult decision expanded what he believed was possible. Over time, something incredible happened. The same situations that once intimidated him no longer had the same power. Not because life had become easier, because he had become stronger. This is one of the greatest rewards of mastering your mind. Problems do not always disappear, but your ability to handle them grows. The mountain may remain the same height, yet the climber becomes more capable. David's greatest victory was never over another person. It was over the version of himself that believed he was limited, the version that accepted excuses, the version that feared discomfort. That version slowly disappeared. In its place stood someone who understood a life-changing truth. Your mind can either become the prison that keeps you small, or the weapon that helps you build the life you truly want. David chose to make his mind his greatest ally, and with that decision, he was finally ready for the next lesson. A lesson that would teach him how to face himself with complete honesty. Because true growth begins when you stop hiding from the truth. Chapter 5. The Accountability Mirror. There comes a moment in every person's life when excuses stop working. Not because life becomes easier, not because someone forces you to change, but because deep inside, you know the truth. You know exactly where you are. You know exactly what you have been avoiding. And you know exactly who you could become if you finally stopped lying to yourself. David Goggins reached that moment. He realized that the greatest obstacle in his life was not his past. It was the stories he continued telling himself. Stories that protected his comfort. Stories that explained why he could not move forward. Stories that sounded reasonable but quietly kept him trapped. That was when he created one of the most powerful habits in his entire journey. He called it the accountability mirror. Every morning, he forced himself to face the truth. No distractions, no pretending, no excuses, just complete honesty. He looked at himself and asked difficult questions. What am I avoiding? Where am I making excuses? What promise did I fail to keep yesterday? What must I do today to become better than I was yesterday? These questions were uncomfortable, but that was exactly the point. Comfort rarely creates growth. Truth does. Most people avoid honest self-reflection because it exposes weaknesses. David discovered that exposing weakness is the first step toward eliminating it. You cannot improve what you refuse to acknowledge. Imagine trying to repair a broken machine while pretending nothing is wrong. Nothing changes. The same thing happens with your life. If you continue pretending everything is fine, you never fix the real problems. David stopped hiding from reality. Instead of protecting his ego, he started protecting his future. That required humility. It required accepting that he still had much to learn, that he still had bad habits, that he still had fears. But instead of feeling defeated by those truths, he felt empowered, because every weakness he identified became another opportunity to improve. That is the purpose of accountability, not to make you feel guilty, but to make you responsible. Responsibility creates action. Action creates progress. Progress creates confidence. Confidence creates a stronger identity. Everything begins with honesty. David also realized something important about excuses. Excuses often sound intelligent. They sound logical. They sound convincing. I'm too busy. I'll start next week. I need the perfect plan. I'll wait until I'm more confident. The problem is not that these statements are always false. The problem is that they delay action, and delayed action slowly becomes a delayed life. Months become years. Years become decades. Then one day, people wonder why nothing changed. David refused to let time become another excuse. He understood that the perfect moment does not exist. There will always be uncertainty. There will always be fear. There will always be reasons to wait. The people who transform their lives are not those who wait for certainty. They are the ones who move forward despite uncertainty. That became his new standard, not perfection, progress. Every day, he focused on becoming just a little better. One better decision, one better habit, one more promise kept, one more excuse eliminated. Those small improvements accumulated. Just as small excuses slowly weaken a person, small victories slowly strengthen them. David learned that accountability is not something you practice once. It is something you practice every day. Every morning is a new opportunity to tell yourself the truth. Every evening is a new opportunity to evaluate your actions honestly. Did you become stronger today? Did you grow? Or did you allow comfort to make your decisions? These questions are powerful because they place the responsibility back where it belongs, on you. That may sound intimidating, but it is also incredibly freeing. Because if you're responsible for your choices, you're also capable of changing them. No matter what happened yesterday, no matter how many mistakes you made, no matter how far behind you believe you are, today gives you another chance, another decision, another opportunity to become someone stronger. David Goggins looked into the mirror and stopped searching for someone else to blame. Instead, he found the person who had the power to change everything, himself. And from that day forward, every honest conversation with that mirror became another step toward the life he wanted to build. Because the mirror never lies. The question is, are you willing to listen to what it shows you? Chapter 6. Embracing failure and breaking your limits. For most people, failure is the end of the story. One mistake, one rejection, one bad decision, and they begin believing they are not capable. David Goggins chose a different path. He refused to see failure as a final answer. Instead, he treated it as feedback. Every setback carried information. Every mistake exposed a weakness. Every weakness pointed toward an opportunity to improve. This simple shift changed everything. Because when failure becomes a lesson, it loses the power to define you. Think about learning any new skill. The first attempt is rarely your best. You make mistakes. You struggle. You improve. Then you struggle again. Progress is built through correction. Life works the same way. The people who achieve extraordinary things are not the people who never fail. They are the people who refuse to let failure become their identity. David understood that there is a dangerous sentence many people repeat without realizing it. I failed. At first, it sounds harmless, but over time, it slowly changes into something much more destructive. I am a failure. There's an enormous difference between those two statements. The first describes an event. The second describes an identity. Events can change. Identity shapes your future. David never allowed temporary setbacks to become permanent labels. Instead, he asked one question after every failure. What is this trying to teach me? Sometimes the answer was obvious. He needed more preparation, more discipline, more patience, more consistency. Other times, the answer took longer to understand. But he always searched for the lesson, because every lesson made him stronger. This mindset also changed the way he viewed limits. Most limits are not physical. They are mental. People often stop long before they have reached their true potential. Not because their body cannot continue, because their mind has convinced them to stop. Fear creates invisible walls. Doubt creates invisible walls. Comfort creates invisible walls. David wanted to know what existed on the other side of those walls. So instead of accepting them, he challenged them, not recklessly, not to impress others, but to discover the truth about himself. Every difficult challenge became an experiment. Every obstacle became a question. Is this really my limit? Again and again, he discovered that the answer was no. He could do more, learn more, endure more, become more. That realization transformed the way he lived. He stopped measuring himself by what he had already achieved. He started measuring himself by what he was still capable of becoming. This is one of the greatest lessons from his journey. Never confuse your current ability with your ultimate potential. Your current ability reflects where you are today. Your potential reflects where disciplined effort can take you. Those are two very different things. David also realized that growth requires courage, not the courage to never feel afraid, the courage to move forward while feeling afraid. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is the decision that something else is more important than fear. Every meaningful goal requires that decision. Starting a business, changing careers, improving your health, learning a difficult skill, building a better life. Every one of those paths demands courage. Not once, but repeatedly. David chose courage every day. Sometimes he succeeded, sometimes he failed, but he always returned. And returning is what separates committed people from everyone else. Anyone can work hard for a day. Anyone can stay motivated for a week. The true challenge is continuing after disappointment, continuing after failure, continuing when nobody is cheering for you. That is where character is revealed. Character is built in the moments when quitting seems reasonable. David refused to let reasonable excuses become permanent barriers. He understood that greatness is not created by perfect circumstances. It is created by imperfect people who continue improving. That realization gave him freedom. He no longer feared failure. He feared staying the same, because remaining the same would guarantee the future he no longer wanted. Failure, on the other hand, at least meant he was moving. He was learning. He was growing. He was becoming stronger than yesterday. That is why every setback became another step forward. Not because failure is enjoyable, but because failure handled correctly becomes one of life's greatest teachers. David embraced that teacher. And in doing so, he discovered that the greatest limits in life are often the ones we place on ourselves. The moment we stop believing those limits, we begin discovering what we are truly capable of. Chapter 7. The 40% Rule and Breaking Mental Barriers. One of the most well-known ideas associated with David Goggins is what he calls the 40% Rule. The idea is not a scientific measurement. It is a mindset, a reminder that when most people feel like they have reached their limit, they often still have far more left to give. The lesson is simple. Your mind will usually ask you to stop before you have reached your true potential. Not because you are incapable, but because your brain is designed to protect you from discomfort. It wants safety. It wants certainty. It wants to conserve energy. Thousands of years ago, that instinct helped human beings survive. Today, that same instinct often keeps people from discovering what they are truly capable of. David noticed this pattern in his own life. Whenever a challenge became difficult, his mind immediately began negotiating. You've done enough. You deserve a break. You can finish tomorrow. The voice always sounded reasonable. That is what makes it dangerous. Excuses rarely sound like excuses. They usually sound like logic. David learned to pause whenever that voice appeared. Instead of obeying it immediately, he questioned it. Am I truly at my limit, or am I simply uncomfortable? That single question changed everything. Because discomfort and limitation are not the same thing. Being uncomfortable does not always mean you need to stop. Sometimes it means you are growing. Think about every important achievement in your life. Learning to walk, learning to read, learning a new language, developing a new skill. None of those experiences were comfortable in the beginning. They required patience, mistakes, practice. The discomfort was not evidence that you should quit. It was evidence that your brain was adapting. Life continues to work that way. Every new challenge feels uncomfortable at first. Every meaningful goal requires effort. Every worthwhile achievement demands persistence. David understood that mental barriers are often invisible. No one else can see them, but they influence every decision you make. One person sees an obstacle and turns around. Another sees the same obstacle and keeps moving. The difference is rarely physical ability. More often, it is belief. Belief about what is possible. Belief about what they deserve. Belief about who they are becoming. That is why David spent so much time strengthening his mindset. Because if your beliefs become stronger, your actions naturally begin to change. He also learned not to compare his journey to anyone else's. Comparison can become another invisible barrier. You begin measuring your progress against someone who started years before you. You ignore your own improvement because you're focused on someone else's success. David refused to play that game. His greatest competition was always the person he had been yesterday. Every day, he asked himself a simple question. Am I becoming stronger than I was before? Not perfect, just better. One more lesson learned. One more excuse removed. One more disciplined choice. One more fear faced. That was enough. Because small improvements repeated consistently create extraordinary results over time. This is one of the biggest misconceptions about success. People admire the outcome. They rarely appreciate the process. They celebrate the victory. They overlook the thousands of quiet decisions that created it. David respected the process. He understood that the process shapes the person, and the person creates the result. If you become the right person, the results eventually follow. If you chase results without changing yourself, those results rarely last. This lesson extends beyond fitness. It applies to business, relationships, education, leadership, every meaningful area of life. The biggest breakthrough is rarely external. It happens internally. The day you stop asking, "Can I do this?" and start asking, "What must I become to achieve this?" That question shifts your focus from wishing to becoming. David built his life around becoming. Not becoming famous, not becoming admired, but becoming stronger than his excuses, stronger than his fears, stronger than the voice inside his own head. And that is a challenge every person can choose. Because the greatest barrier standing between who you are today and who you could become is often the barrier inside your own mind. The moment you begin breaking those barriers, your life begins moving in a completely different direction. That is the real meaning behind the 40% rule. Not a number. A reminder that your potential is often far greater than your doubts would have you believe. Chapter 8. Purpose, Growth, and Never Settling After Years of Discipline, Failure, Sacrifice, and Relentless Self-Improvement. David Goggins reached a realization that changed the meaning of success itself. Success is not a finish line. It is a responsibility. Many people believe that once they achieve a goal, everything will finally become easy. They imagine that happiness exists somewhere in the future. If I earn more money, if I become healthier, if I achieve this dream, then I will finally be satisfied. But David discovered that this way of thinking creates a dangerous trap, because every achievement eventually becomes normal. The excitement fades. The celebration ends. Life moves forward. If your happiness depends only on reaching goals, you will spend your life chasing moments that never last. David chose a different approach. Instead of becoming addicted to achievement, he became committed to growth. Growth has no finish line. There is always another lesson to learn, another weakness to improve, another skill to develop, another fear to overcome. That mindset kept him moving forward long after many people would have become comfortable. He refused to settle, not because he was never satisfied, but because he believed every person carries untapped potential, potential that remains hidden until it is challenged. Think about a seed. If it remains inside a box, it never becomes a tree. It stays safe, but also stays small. Only when it is placed in difficult conditions does it begin to grow. People are no different. Growth requires challenge. Growth requires uncertainty. Growth requires patience. David accepted this reality. He stopped asking life to become easier. Instead, he focused on becoming stronger. This small shift changed everything. When you stop expecting an easy life, you stop being surprised by difficulty. When challenges appear, you no longer see them as unfair. You see them as part of the journey. That perspective creates resilience. It creates emotional stability. It creates the ability to continue when circumstances are less than perfect. David also understood the importance of purpose. Discipline without purpose eventually becomes exhausting. Hard work without meaning eventually feels empty. Purpose answers one important question. Why am I doing this? When your purpose is clear, sacrifice becomes easier. Patience becomes easier. Persistence becomes easier because you know what you are working toward. David's purpose became greater than comfort, greater than temporary pleasure, greater than avoiding pain. He wanted to become the strongest version of himself, not for recognition, not for applause, but because he refused to waste the potential he knew existed inside him. That purpose guided every decision, every early morning, every difficult workout, every setback, every victory. Purpose became his compass, and whenever he felt lost, he returned to it. This is a lesson anyone can apply. Your purpose does not have to look like someone else's. It does not need to impress the world. It only needs to be meaningful enough that you are willing to continue when life becomes difficult. Because there will always be difficult days. There will always be moments when quitting feels reasonable. Purpose reminds you why continuing matters. David also learned that becoming stronger is not about proving other people wrong. It is about proving yourself right. It is about becoming the person you promised yourself you would become. That is a much deeper form of success, because it does not depend on applause. It depends on integrity. Integrity is doing what you said you would do, even when nobody is watching. That was the standard David chose. Not perfection, not popularity, integrity, growth, purpose. Those principles became the foundation of his life, and they can become the foundation of yours as well. Because no matter where you begin, no matter how many mistakes you have made, no matter how difficult your past has been, your future is still being written. The question is not whether you have potential. The question is whether you are willing to develop it. David answered that question with his life. Every challenge he accepted, every excuse he defeated, every promise he kept, became another reminder that human potential is far greater than most people ever imagine. And the same possibility exists for anyone willing to take the first step. Chapter 9. Lessons you can apply today. After understanding David Goggins' journey, one important question remains. How can you apply these lessons to your own life? Because a story only creates value when it changes the way you think and act. The purpose of learning from someone else's journey is not to copy their exact path. It is to discover principles that can improve your own. David's life teaches one powerful lesson. You do not need to become a completely different person overnight. You need to start making different decisions today. Small decisions, daily decisions, decisions that slowly create a stronger identity. The first lesson is simple. Take responsibility. Your life may not be exactly where you want it to be. You may have faced difficult situations. You may have experienced failures. You may have reasons to feel frustrated. But the moment you accept that your future depends on your actions, you regain control. Responsibility does not mean blaming yourself for everything that happened. It means understanding that you have power over what happens next. You cannot change yesterday, but you can influence tomorrow. The second lesson is discipline over motivation. Many people wait until they feel ready. They wait until they feel confident. They wait until the perfect moment arrives. But the perfect moment rarely comes. Discipline means starting before you feel ready. It means taking action while uncertainty still exists. Because action creates confidence, not the other way around. The third lesson is learning to embrace discomfort. Growth rarely happens inside complete comfort. If you always choose the easiest path, you may protect yourself from temporary difficulty, but you also protect yourself from discovering your potential. Every person has something they are avoiding: a difficult conversation, a necessary change, a goal they keep delaying. That uncomfortable thing is often where growth begins. The fourth lesson is keeping promises to yourself. Your relationship with yourself matters. Every time you say you will do something and you complete it, you build trust. Every time you break your own promises, you weaken that trust. Your confidence is built by evidence. Evidence that you can rely on yourself. Evidence that you can overcome challenges. Evidence that you are becoming stronger. The fifth lesson is controlling your mind. You will always have negative thoughts. You will always experience fear. You will always have moments where quitting feels easier. But thoughts are not commands. You can choose which thoughts deserve your attention. You can choose which actions represent who you want to become. A strong mind is not a mind without problems. It is a mind that knows how to continue despite problems. The sixth lesson is consistency. Many people search for a dramatic transformation. They want one moment that changes everything. But most transformations happen quietly. One workout, one page read, one difficult task completed, one better decision, repeated over time. Consistency turns small actions into extraordinary results. David Goggins' journey was not created by one impossible day. It was created by thousands of ordinary days where he refused to quit. That is the part many people overlook. They see the achievement. They do not see the process. They see the result. They do not see the sacrifices. But the process is where transformation happens. The final lesson is this: do not compare your beginning to someone else's middle. Everyone has a different starting point. Your responsibility is not to become another person. Your responsibility is to become the strongest version of yourself. Your journey does not need to look impressive to others. It needs to be meaningful to you, because at the end of the day, the person you are building is the person you will live with forever. Every choice today is creating that person. The question is, are your choices building the future you want? Or are they protecting the comfort you have already outgrown? David Goggins answered that question through action. Now the question belongs to you. Chapter 10. Becoming Unstoppable. The final lesson from David Goggins' journey is not about becoming the strongest person in the world. It is not about achieving the most impressive results. It is about becoming someone who refuses to surrender to the weaker version of yourself. Because the greatest opponent you will ever face is not another person. It is the part of you that wants to quit, the part that chooses comfort, the part that creates excuses, the part that says, "You have done enough." David learned that becoming unstoppable does not mean life becomes easy. It means you become prepared for difficulty. You stop expecting every day to be perfect. You stop waiting for challenges to disappear. You accept that challenges are part of the journey. And instead of asking, "Why is this happening?" you start asking, "How can I grow from this?" That question creates a different type of person. A person who does not break when life becomes difficult. A person who adapts. A person who learns. A person who continues. David's greatest achievement was not a race he completed or a title he earned. His greatest achievement was becoming someone he could trust. Someone who kept his promises. Someone who faced himself honestly. Someone who refused to let temporary emotions control permanent decisions. That is what true strength looks like. It is not always loud. It is not always visible. Sometimes strength is simply showing up again. After failure, after disappointment, after a difficult day, the ability to return is one of the most powerful skills a person can develop. Because everyone struggles. Everyone has moments of weakness. Everyone experiences fear. The difference is what you do after those moments. Do you stay down? Or do you stand up again? David chose to stand up again and again. That choice became his identity. An identity is powerful because when you truly believe you are someone who does not quit, your actions begin to follow that belief. You stop negotiating with every challenge. You stop searching for reasons to avoid difficult things. You begin looking for opportunities to improve. This is how ordinary people create extraordinary lives. Not through one massive action, through thousands of small actions that prove who they are becoming. The person you want to become is not created in the future. It is created today. Every morning you wake up, every decision you make, every challenge you face, every promise you keep, all of these moments are building your identity. The question is not, can I change? The question is, am I willing to do what change requires? Because transformation always has a price. You may have to leave behind old habits, old excuses, old ways of thinking. You may have to disappoint the version of yourself that wanted an easier path. But what you gain is far more valuable. You gain confidence. You gain discipline. You gain self-respect. You gain the knowledge that you are capable of more than you once believed. David Goggins' story reminds us that your starting point does not determine your ending. Your past does not have the final word. Your current situation is not your permanent identity. You always have the ability to choose a different direction. One decision, one habit, one step at a time. The journey will not always be comfortable, but comfort was never the place where greatness was created. Greatness is created in moments of challenge, moments where you decide that your goals matter more than your excuses, moments where you decide that your future matters more than your temporary feelings, moments where you choose to become stronger. That is the mindset of someone who becomes unstoppable, not someone who never struggles, someone who never stops improving. And that is the final lesson. You do not need to be perfect. You need to be committed, because every day you have another opportunity to become better than yesterday. And over time, those small improvements become a completely different life. End of chapter 10. The choice is yours. After everything we have learned from David Goggins' journey, one truth remains clear. The person who changes your life is not someone else. It is you, not your circumstances, not your past, not the opinions of other people. You, because every day you're making choices that shape the person you are becoming. Some choices build strength. Some choices create excuses. Some choices move you forward. Some choices keep you exactly where you are. The difference between the life you have and the life you want is often found in those small decisions. The decision to wake up and try again. The decision to keep going when things become difficult. The decision to stop making excuses. The decision to believe that you are capable of becoming more. David Goggins' story is powerful because it proves something important. You do not have to be perfect to transform your life. You do not have to have a perfect past. You do not have to start with perfect conditions. You only need the willingness to take responsibility and begin. The journey will not always be easy. There will be days when you doubt yourself. There will be moments when quitting feels like the logical choice. There will be times when progress feels slow. But those moments are not signs that you should stop. They are moments that reveal who you are becoming. Remember this: a weak moment does not make you weak. A failure does not make you a failure. A difficult season does not define your entire life. What defines you is your response. Will you learn? Will you grow? Will you continue? The strongest people are not those who never fall. They are those who always find a way to rise again. Your future self is waiting for the decisions you make today, the habits you build, the promises you keep, the challenges you face, the excuses you leave behind. One day, you will look back and realize that the small choices you made changed everything. So ask yourself one final question. Are you willing to become the person your future requires? Because the truth is, your potential is much greater than the limits you have accepted. Your story is not finished. Your journey is not over. And the next chapter of your life begins with one decision: the decision to stop waiting and start becoming. This is your challenge. This is your opportunity. This is your moment. The choice is yours.